presentation from 3 keynote speakers. And for the rest of this time, I will ask the moderator to lead today's discussion. Right? The time is actually start from 8 until 10:30. It's flexible. Pak Heri and also Pak Sukela, time is yours. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to you all. Welcome to the first International Teacher Education Conference, ITEC 2013, with the title, the topic redefining teacher education, building milestone for global partnerships and development in education in Bandar Lampung. Welcome to the speakers, keynote speakers, Professor Bruce Waldrip, Professor Rebecca Johnson, and Professor Rosnani Hasim for this plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to Bandar Lampung. This morning we begin the session with a strange rainy rain in the dry season, hujan di tengah kemarau. And you will see also in Bandar Lampung a lot of things for the rest of the stay in Bandar Lampung. For this morning plenary session, there will be 3 speakers. Professor Bruce Waldrip from Monash University, Australia, Professor Rebecca Johnson from Columbia University, United States of America, and Professor Rosnani Hasim from Islamic IWM, Malaysia. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the Professor Bruce Waldrip, and next Dr. Sukiran will introduce Professor Rebecca Johnson and Professor Rosnani Hasim. Professor Bruce Waldrip has written over 200 journal articles, and one of the most successful, Professor Bruce, one of the most successful is from Australian Research Council grant. Professor Bruce has been teaching in Pacific Island and Australia, and now he's teaching in Monash University. His interests are in student learning science education. His major is in chemistry, mathematics, and his minor is physics, geology, and astronomy, a very complete one. Next, the introduction for Rebecca Johnson, Professor Rebecca Johnson, and Professor Rosnani Hasim, Dr. Sukiran will do it, and the rest will be led by Pak Sukiran.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Rebecca Johnson is Director of Education and Professional Development, Center for Environmental Economy and Science and Society at Columbia University. He's been 12 years developing science and teacher training, and how he works her specialization is in conservation biology, Columbia University. And then the third keynote speaker will be Professor Rosnani Hasim, Dekan Institut Pendidikan UIAM, International Islamic University of Malaysia. Her PhD is in Asas Sosial Pendidikan, University of Florida, and bidang spesialisasi falsafah pendidikan, philosophy of education, and curriculum and instructional, and then pendidikan Islam or Islamic education, and also pendidikan matematika or mathematical education. And he's recently introducing the pedagogy hikmah or philosophical inquiry di sekolah di Malaysia. And then publication Educational Dualism in Malaysia, Oxford English Press, in 1996. These three keynote speakers will have 30 minutes for presenting the paper, and then there will be questions and answer session. I think it will be about 1 hour to ask questions. Well, now let's welcome the first keynote speaker, Professor Bruce Waldrip from University of Monash University. Time is yours.
Hello, I'm a person who likes to stand up, okay? When I first went to work at the Pacific many years ago, I learned a number of things about them. They do things differently to me, okay? And how they learned was quite different. And I used to have interesting times seeing what they could do that I couldn't do. They did things differently. But one thing I did learn out there is Pacific time. Here there's rubber time. We have examinations. In many countries, examinations. And we can teach our students. Some students do well, some don't. Some of the students don't know when their answer is not a good answer. The teacher's not around to give them feedback. They have to do the exam themselves. So I want to talk about some ways we work with students so they think about their answer and evaluate their answer and improve it. Okay? And I want to give you a little quick illustration. This is a family illustration. I have a cousin who's just died recently. He's one of the top vehicle restorers, Chevelle, for Rebecca's sake, cars in the US. Gets many prizes for what he does. That's his business. He's been through a number of marriages. I still got my first wife. Okay? He, at the time I went and visited him once, he just had a new wife. And I'm going to talk about his daughter here. She was about 6 years old. The mother had just recently divorced from her husband. And the children were not happy. So the daughter was very rude to me, said a lot of nasty things. And after a few days, because I'd never seen them before, I decided I was going to tell them a story. And the story I told them basically involved, one, having a crocodile as a guard dog, because they knew nothing about Australia, and tell them how I used to ride kangaroos to go to work. No one could ride kangaroos. She went to school the next day and told her classmates and told her teacher that here it was, I was an Australian coming here and I had a crocodile in the yard and I ride a kangaroo to work. Sometime later she found out I told her a story that wasn't true. And she got very cranky. Mum said to her, you never check the story. What happens in our teaching? We never ask students to really show how they got the answer. Is it a reasonable answer? Okay, so one thing I want to look at is when we look briefly at the knowledge, the domain, the teacher looks at that and they say, this is what I need to teach them. That involves PCK, pedagogic content knowledge. How do you put it in language the children understand? The children don't come to class empty vessels. They have experience on things. They have ideas. Ideas may be good, they may be wrong, but they have ideas. So students have ideas they work with. There's a need for students to talk amongst themselves. Hey, I think this, what do you think? And get a discussion. This is how I work out the answer. How did you do yours? But there's also a need for the students to explain to the teachers what they're learning. Not just tell me what the teacher said, but explain it. Showing why my answer right. And I'll come back to that. Before I go into that, I want to use the word representation. Representation is something that stands for something else. What do I mean? I take the route network. You know that tells me not the flight path of the plane, but it shows me where the plane goes. So if I took off here from Lampung, it says yes, I can go, this one doesn't show that. Well, let's say you take Denpasar. Denpasar here, we know it can fly across to Jayapura, very nice place, interested to visit, enjoy it there. Or you can take it across to Jakarta. But we know from Denpasar, it doesn't go off to Philippines. It tells us things. It's very useful. So it helps us do something. I want to give you a couple of examples. Here is okay? Yes. Here is a map. Oopsie, I pushed the wrong button, sorry. Here's a map of Western Australia. This here looks a bit strange at first. When you first look at it, when PE students look at a map, first thing they don't know what's important on the map. You're looking at that and you're thinking, what should I be looking at? That's one problem we've got. So it needs to point out to them what is the essential parts. Because they don't know what is. I love that, and here they've taken some information. They found that the rainfall on this side of the line is higher, this side is less. This side's temperature's higher, this side the temperature's lower, more rain this side. And they did to look at there, and they thought, this is interesting. Why is it that? They looked also from space, and that line is exactly the same. What's so interesting about that line going through there? That's where about 100 years ago they built a fence to keep the rabbits out. Because rabbits were brought to Australia by the English people. They wanted rabbits to hunt. And so the West Australians said, we've got to put a fence there so the rabbits can't get through. The rabbits just burrowed underneath and kept going. But what is interesting, they cleared this side and this side left the vegetation as it is. By changing the vegetation, and the other bit, we now notice rainfall's different each side of the fence. The wind is different, the temperatures are different. We can now take information from a range of sources and make sense of it. But to get students to do that, they need to know what's important. Start to link parts together. That takes training by the teacher. Also, we look around the place, and I won't just talk science, after all subjects. There's lots of different diagrams we use in our teaching. We have photos, we have charts, we have graphs, animations, a whole lot of things. When students look at that, to them it's a bit like talking Russian, no idea what you're talking about. It's a case of training their learning. Also, when you look, Judge, you need to be careful. That picture there is a picture of what the world looks like at night. If you don't talk about the limitations, students get some incorrect ideas. They think the world when it's dark is everywhere around the world is dark. Because that picture shows it dark. They don't understand that it's a composite. It's showing what happens as you look at darkness, not what is it happening now. Because if it's dark, if it's like here in Indonesia, it'll be dark over here. So they can. All through history we've used drawings to tell stories. This comes from France. They've drawn drawings here of their conquest and hunting. And we try and interpret. They can help us interpret. They can help us to reason, to show an understanding. So here's one we used in classroom just a few weeks ago. The teacher put up this diagram and the students be learning about flight. They're learning flight from two perspectives. A social studies perspective and a science perspective. And look at that diagram. The teacher asked a few questions. Is that plane flying or is it on the ground? How do you know? Some students thought, oh, it's flying, because couldn't see the wheels. Then they asked a question also. If it's on the ground, is it taxiing? Is it going faster? Is it going slower? If it's flying, what is it doing? Constant speed? descending or climbing. Now, the teacher was teaching in this area and it wasn't their strength. They always said it. That happens in many classrooms. Here are some of the student responses. If, I should come back. The thrust and the drag is the forward and going backwards. We push it back. The left is the eccentricity and the weight. So the question was, if the thrust equals the drag, in other words, the force going forward is equal to the wind resistance, what will happen? Most people think if I'm flying, it's because I've been pushed along, and if it's greater, I'm going to be getting faster. Plane, when it goes, if it wants to go faster, it also goes higher. When you come into land, what does the plane do? Turn slows down to the engines, so it goes slowly and starts to drop to the ground. When the thrust and the drag is equal, that's when it's the top of the flight. So the students said, oh, we'll go very slowly, we'll be able to turn. Had no idea. This taught me some things about how students are learning. The plane would stop and fall. No, they would be going at constant speed, top of the flight. If they're equal, it would go steady in the plane. That sounds great. If drag increased, it would go on and angle down. It would start descending if the drag was increased. Okay, the picture actually showed more drag. That student had a better idea. But when they talked about the lift and the gravity, in other words, the weight of the plane compared to how high you want to go up, one said it's too heavy, it wouldn't be able to fly. That has nothing to do with it. The plane will lose control, not be able to fly. This one said the plane will go through the ground and float right up. In other words, if the weight was too heavy, it would start going down. If the weight was light, it would climb. So when a plane wants to go faster, it also goes higher. That's how they control their height. So looking at students' answers gives us feedback on how to understand it. And that feedback can happen in the evening class. Okay, so one of the first words I use, I'm not going to do it here, we take the words, simple word we use, and we put the word speed acceleration. Tell me what it means. And you'll find in your classroom there'll be many definitions of the same word. So we get them to talk not in a group, but as a group, discussing and coming up with one answer between the group. Then we ask them to show their understanding. It's easy in some ways to give a definition. Then to get out and demonstrate the understanding is much harder. That causes a discussion. How do I change my definition to match what I was shown? So they then got to explain it and reason why. So I'll take a simple example. I'll do it on the wall here, because if I do it on the floor, no one will see. If I take some balls, I throw from the wall, you notice that they will bounce off the ladder. They'll bounce differently. Like that. Now I get a little box like this. This goes down. The question comes is, not the weight, but begin thinking, why does something bounce? If I can hold this one here, it's different. Right? But why does it bounce? First thing, I get them to start drawing and thinking about why it bounces. As you do that, you'll get an idea of their understanding. And if I get a ball like this, I'll be careful what I'm doing here. Oh, that didn't work. I'm going to still stay up there for a few days. Okay, and it gets them rethinking, because the ability of a ball to bounce is related to its ability to regain its shape. But students, as they do it, start to realise that some balls, their ideas doesn't work. With other balls, it does. And as they explain it to each other, the teacher doesn't mean the teacher does nothing. The teacher has to have a very important role in asking the right questions and in thinking. Students can't do that without teacher help. The teacher's role is very important. Also, I want to give you an idea. This is just, I don't want to go through the whole graph, but one thing we've been picking up is There are some teachers who focus very much on getting the task done and having good behaviour in classroom. Yes, they can make some difference to student learning. We've been looking very much what happens when you focus on the thinking. If you focus very much on the task, it's well below when you start thinking on the thinking. Now here, this is the negative part. The lower it is, the better it is. Okay? When they focus on thinking, students' gains are much, much higher. And when you can change teachers from focusing on, instead of getting the job done, go into think why and how, and start to engage the brain. They understand improves and also they engage. So, give you an illustration. This might come on a bit loud, so
Mr. Chairman.
I'll stop. The question's going to be here. How does 28 divided by 7 equal 13? Don't tell me it's wrong, but think about how did they get that answer and how would you deal with that? Because students have that thought, and I'm going to say to you, if students don't understand how their ideas are not working, they will give you the answer you want in an exam, but won't change their thinking. Right, I'll just drop that volume a fraction there.
28 vacuums a week, that's a lot of vacuums to sell. And you only got 7 salesmen? That means they got to sell 13 vacuums apiece.
You're right, Pete. 13 vacuum cleaners apiece.
Yes, sir.
What are you talking about? 7 times 13 is not 28.
Yes, it is.
7 times 4 is 28.
Mr. Chairman, 7 times 13 is 28.
7 times 4 is 28. Did you ever go to school, stupid?
Yes, sir. And I come out the same way.
Come here. You claim the 7 goes into 28 13 times?
That's right.
Go ahead, prove it. Go ahead. Go on. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to prove it.
Go ahead.
Now you got 7 salesmen.
That's right.
Okay, there's a 7.
Where is it?
Right there.
All right.
Now you got 28 vacuums a week you got to sell.
That's right.
I'm going to divide. There's your 28 vacuums.
Now, wait, you claim the 7 goes into 28 13 times?
That's right.
Show me.
7 to 2. 7 to 1 to 2.
Certainly not.
So I gotta take the 2 from there and put it down here.
Okay, put it down there.
Yeah, I'm gonna use that after work. That's a cute little tune.
Yeah.
Now, 7 to 8 once.
Sorry, let's start again because that did not show move forward.
Mr. Chairman, 28 vacuums a week.
Something's not going right here.
That's a lot of vacuums to sell.
It was working perfectly for last night, and I don't know why it's not working here. So I checked it last night. What I want to show you is, he actually comes down and he shows you by adding up lots of 13s. What he's not doing is taking the ones and putting them into the 10 columns and putting them in the units column. I honestly think I'm going to have trouble with this one. I'll just give a second. I'll pick it up from a different source. Sorry though, I thought it was going right. This is a good illustration. This shows us the same thing, but from a different perspective, slightly different question.
I figure 75%. Do you know that?
Sorry, I'm in trouble. I'll just do it all way back in time. Sorry, no, but it's like. Right. Sorry, no, that is good illustration, but anyway. classes for questions. They may not ask them, but they have questions in mind. And it's important to teach them how to ask the questions. They sometimes don't know the words how to do it. And so the questions is an art you need to teach them. How to ask good questions. Not something you expect them to come up with. They'll have them, but they don't know how to say it. So something to think about is traffic lights. Simple question. Why are traffic lights green or red? Why are they that colour? Now, history, the way it all started was an accident. In history, they learned that what you used to do to cure a person, you used to bleed them. And they thought that was a way of making you better. So if you were sick, a person would come in with a sharp knife and bleed you. They started noticing after a while that those people who lost too much blood also died. So they had the idea if you lose too much blood and blood is red, you die. So blood was dangerous. So that's where the first colour of stoplight came. It's not the real reason. If you go out on a foggy day, you go past a traffic light, the colour that is easiest to see is the red. It's less affected by the pollution. It's alright if you can't see the green, but you want to be able to see the stop. So there's a very strong scientific reason why traffic lights are red. But asking a question like that gives consent. Or if I go down to the beach and I look over the beach and I see seagulls. In the morning they get there and they flap their wings and they stop their feet. Why do they do that? What they're doing is making the worms underneath pretend it's raining. Because when it rains, the worms come up. Free lunch. You ask them the question they often want to know. You also teach them how to ask the question. Why is it that young girls, doesn't matter what country you're in, usually are attracted to women? Always are. Why? Got them interested. Or another question I'll ask young lads, they love this one. If I go to the moon and I bend over and I've got a spacesuit on and I split my pants, what will happen to me? Boys are always interested in that. They're interested in listening. Okay? And there are very good reasons why. Okay. So I want to show you a quick one. Quick one, we took a solid, liquid and gas. Is it that how far apart is always true? Is it always? Well, perhaps it's not always. We can do a number of things. Look at ice. Ice, when you heat ice, the particles get closer together as hot water, not further apart. So there's some things that seem to obey rules, but there can be exceptions. Nothing wrong with exceptions. You pretend that there are exceptions, you'll be the problem. But ask them to draw the difference. When they come to draw, when you start to show, because the difference between solid, liquids and gas is not how many textbooks say, it's how far apart. It's to do with how strongly they are bonded. Not that. But most textbooks are written by someone and they don't think that. Okay, I'm going to give that video a piece of Vince Troll. I want to show you something else. Watch a little bit of this part. I hope this works. I hope I haven't got a serious word.
Doing something else and they made me take my watch and my...
No, I'll go back before again. I am disappointed it doesn't work. I checked it all yesterday, making sure that it all worked.
We're doing something else and they made me take my watch and my ring off and what do we do?
Sorry about it. I even showed somebody yesterday. Right, take it about melting, dissolving. We get a hot cup of tea. We get some sugar to put in there. And you start to do that. You say, what's happening here? I suggest a lot of your students and a lot of children will tell you it's melting. So you've got to start thinking, how do we call that? And I want to show you something to get you thinking. What I'm going to do here, I've got a mobile phone. I'm going to take my mobile phone, and I don't actually see the PIN number, so I put it in separately. And I'm going to get this mobile phone, and I'm going to show you something which you will have trouble seeing from where you are, but no problem with that. I'm going to take some lollies. And I'm going to put 4 lollies in the water. Some people call them candies, depends where you ask. And I asked students to, I know what. Why is this happening? Alright. You ask them why are those colours moving? And students will come up with a range of answers. You ask them to predict. All I've done is taken some like candies or lollies that you can get around the place. Ask them to watch and then also say what happens. What happens when the colours mix? They make predictions. When they make a prediction, they like to be right. Oh, okay. No, stop. Rubber time they like to be right. They don't like to be wrong. So when they make a prediction, they're now interested in seeing what happens. So as they observe that, they see the colour spread. Now, to make the colour spread, firstly, words we've got to be careful of. If we're teaching a new concept, we use a big word first, they stop listening. So I teach the idea, then I give the labels later. So why does the colour spread? And I can use this from kindergarten children right up. The words I use will vary according to the education level of the children. But I will talk about sharing. This is the first concept I come up with. Children know who are selfish. They know who are nice children. Nice children are not selfish. So you say to look, the colour looks around, it looks around the water, sees the colour water hasn't got any. So it wants to give some of its colour. Once it's gone there, it looks around, sees the next bit of water hasn't got any, so it passes on the colour. So the colour is being shared out. And that is the idea, and I'm not in dissolution, but I've report the colour, why it moves through. Yes, I know there's bonding involved. Yes, I know you've got to talk about water, covalent bonding and other things. Okay? But first talk about the idea of sharing. And what you'll find is that as that spread, the colours will meet, but they will not mix. Why not? That is confusing. They've got to then explain why it doesn't mix. And the reason it doesn't mix is simple. The colours are always coloured sugar. And when they meet, they're the same strength. There's no need to share. Because everyone's got some colour. Just have different colour, but it's all the same amount. So they can talk about that and realise that you get straight lines. But that's getting something where they've got to start explaining, something they can see, something they can take home. And since they told me I'd be quick, I'm better. Okay. Oh. There. So things we find is simply, when you give students the opportunity to share their ideas with others, they're more likely to have a state. In other words, think they've got something to say and think. When they share ideas, they've got to also not just tell them an idea, but why they think it's a good idea. Why it's reasonable. Cooperative group work that is not people just working in a group individually, it doesn't work. But working in a group where they are justifying to each other and coming up with a common understanding, that does work. We've seen students move in and out of that. When they move out, the cheeks all fall. When they come back in and start working as a group to help each other to learn and to justify, and it's not the bright student saying, I have the answer, but why, it improves. Also, student group generated knowledge helps individuals learn, but individuals can help the group learn. I'll skip a couple of these because time. I'm going to skip a couple here. Now, one thing that students tell us, they often don't understand until they see another student present their explanation. They understand better when a student tells them often than when the teacher does. This does not mean the teacher hasn't got an important role. The teacher has a very important role asking and facilitating the learning process. Students can't do that. And I skip a couple others. Also, students start to assess. Do I understand? Do I not? Who understands better? They start to understand the assessment criteria. Why is it making a difference? I have a good time, don't I? Okay, so there's needs to monitor the skills as to what the students understand. So what skills do I use to get them to understand how their ideas are developing? 2, knowing as a teacher when to intervene. Class I was in last week, this teacher was considered a good teacher, but will quickly jump in and say, think of this, think of that. Students learn to stop thinking, because they knew the teacher would tell them the answer. So learning was not as great in that class. What success have we had? We've taken the bottom class in school in a year level, and in 3 months we've had them the top, and they've stayed that way the rest of the year. Okay? You jumping too soon? No. The teacher needs to promote reasoning and thinking skills. So often come in with something they haven't thought of and get the thing through. Ensure that it's understanding when students generate ideas, complement, but also you need to talk about the limits. When they do a drawing, there's things they often miss out, things that are not correct. Or take the one on the map of the world. That map of the world was a limitation because it gives the idea that it's dark everywhere around the world at the same time. And student question skills. And I'll just skip to the last point, a couple of things. The things we find very important, they work as a group, not in a group. The teacher has to plan a series of challenges that get students thinking. It's not a case of doing one thing today, then leaving. You've got to have a series of ideas that explore their understanding. 3, you've got to get students engaged, and that happens when they start thinking and start adding their comments. You've got to look and recognise when solutions are equivalent. So, we had a question. 12 divided by 5. Is it closer? So no, sorry, 12 divided by what number is closer to 2.5? And they could take a number of numbers. They had to realise, how could they got that answer? Was there another way to do it? An example, another way, 7 over 8 is what over 16? One student wrote down 15 over 16. Why? 7 is 1 smaller than 8, so the answer must be 1 smaller than 16. But in doing that, the students had 4 different ways they actually solved it, all were workable. They needed to recognise what's equivalent. It's also learning to transfer skills and reasoning. It also is an ongoing information. And my time is up, but I want to talk more. I will have time. Okay? Time to talk, but when you say thinking, reasoning, justifying are absolutely critical. And if you say to me it doesn't work in your classroom, I will say to you, when it comes to high final exams, don't complain if your students don't know if their answer is reasonable enough. They have to learn that skill that when they're by themselves, they can test their answer and judge is it a reasonable answer or not. Okay? Students who are coached do well in school, but don't do well in the future. We will argue when they start to think and reason, their achievement improves, and we've got plenty of evidence on this now. It changes the subjects they select later, and their enjoyment at school changes, their engagement in class changes, and they do most so much better. They outperform the rest quite a long way. Where it's even more important is when you have more than one teacher trying in the same class, because they're reinforcing each other. Okay, questions, comments? Ask questions, yes.
We have a special session for question and answer. All right?
Yeah.
So, is it, you finished with your...
Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Bruce. You may sit down and then we'll continue. The next will be the next presenter. Cheers for Professor Bruce Worley. The next presentation is from Professor Rebecca Johnson from Columbia University. Later we will have a special session for question and answer. Bapak dan Ibu, correct me if I'm wrong, Profesor Bruce, salah satu yang hal terpenting dari Profesor Bruce tadi adalah dalam mengajar tidak cukup untuk menjelaskan saja. Siswa harus diajar berpikir dan menjelaskan apa yang mereka pahami. Itu kalau saya salah. So students, it is not enough to teach students by explaining, but we'll have to let the students explain what they have understood. Ini kunci dari kata-kata inti. Is that right, Bruce? Professor Bruce, the key word is, it is not enough to teach students by explaining to them, but let the students be able to explain what they have understood. Thank you. Now, Professor Rebecca, that is yours.
I forgot to read this. I thought that was such a wonderful presentation, and it actually encapsulates in a really excellent way the work that I've tried to do. I'm actually in a different position than you. I don't really have a background in science pedagogy theoretically. I had a degree in conservation biology, and I worked at centers at Columbia University developing programs in science. But like so many educational institutions, sort of doing it by the seat of our pants, like just saying, well, this is something we think people should know, so we'll develop a program we think is good to teach them that, but without really having a lot of solid pedagogical foundation. So a lot of my experience actually, it has been learning backwards, trying to implement things, having them not work as well as I wish they did, and then learning the hard way what we just learned in the presentation before. So this is just what I'm going to cover. I think I actually got a little bit too literal about the global ethic and citizenship, but I will still go through some of that. And I want to basically tell you some of the work that I've done in New York and elsewhere, and a lot of it will be familiar to you, I think. This is my center, just an introduction. And we do sustainable development work and we do education, so I lead the education arm. And the idea is that it integrates not just environmental science, but also economic and social science. And I'm in Indonesia right now because I have a USA university partnership between Columbia University and ITB and Bogor. And we're going to improve STEM education, we hope, at the high school level in Indonesia. This is just a quick, these are the ways we're going to do it. But basically, our main activity is working with high schools that will become models of STEM education and working specifically to improve teacher quality of instruction. And we're going to do that by giving them innovative curriculums, but a lot of it, I hope, will be project-based. They went to New York City, actually, a couple of months ago in March, and they got to see different schools that approach STEM education in very specific ways. So now they're in the process of deciding which sorts of approaches they want to adopt themselves. So this is a global program because obviously it's an international collaboration. But I started to ask myself, if we're thinking about preparing global citizens, what does that require? Is it just enough to be in 2 different countries, for example? So for example, this is a program I developed, which was an undergraduate field education program in the Dominican Republic. We sent very wealthy undergraduate students from Columbia University who are already very well educated to the Dominican Republic to do their science learning in the field there. We also had very educated journalists come and do science training in various locations around the world. The main, most successful way to promote global citizenship and a global ethic, I think, came from the integrated ecology curriculum, which is going to be the focus of a lot of my talk. This was a program at low-income schools where the students focused very locally, actually. What you see on the left are students who are walking through their neighborhood, and they created a transect, and they had a checklist of environmental amenities and environmental burdens. And so they were looking for patterns that they would then use as the basis for research and investigation. And then on the right hand is, they're looking at a skull, I think, there, which is from the forest nearby. So, globalization, we think about, I've used this book because that was the famous book that came out. We seem to be global. We have an unlimited ability to interact globally through commerce, communications, and immigration and travel. And so that's why there is a focus on globalization and learning, because it seems absolutely necessary for citizens of today, right? And so it seems like, well, aren't we already global citizens? What do we need to teach? The kids are already on the computers. There's complete cultural diffusion, and they seem to have a lot of contact with the outside world. But sometimes globalization can undermine a sense of global citizenship because it can undermine the sense of belonging to a place. So I go through quickly what the notions of global citizenship are: being able to understand and perceive differences, to work effectively and interact with different people, and to be able to adapt to novel and unfamiliar conditions. And but it also means membership. You have to self-identify. So it's not enough to just say, I can talk to somebody across the world via Skype, but to feel like you are responsible for the welfare of the global community. And that requires moving outward from your own personal sense of identity and belonging in your family out to sort of local community, all the way outward through nationality and ethnicity to the global community. And so part of making that sense of identity is identifying the things that you have in common. And so these are sort of transcendent values, transcendent behaviors and norms, and an idea that we all share some sort of, that there are some truths or some ideas that we all can understand regardless of culture. And so part of the awareness is the interdependence of everybody. And globalization has really made everybody aware, and students are starting to get this awareness too, that there really are no borders the way we think of them in the past. That geography and time and space are much less limiting than they used to be, but that also makes it clear that we are all affected by each other, and we don't have the protection of boundary that we used to have. So the goal, of course, is to strive for peaceful coexistence. And I hope it's more than that, peaceful coexistence, but I hope that there's something a little bit more proactive than that, but at least that's the minimum. So as I said, they need to know themselves. One thing that I think is probably slightly less of a problem in Indonesia, where there's such a focus on the unique cultures that make up the Indonesian people. But in the United States, there's a very large, strong impulse for assimilation, to become American. And so by the second generation of immigrants, students often sort of have an understanding, even if their parents came here and still speak their own language, they sort of have a sense of themselves as coming from another place, but the Americanness takes over. And one thing that is really happening actually is a lack of understanding of where they are physically in the world in New York City. Because you're in the city, it's sort of divorced from all sense of geography, topography, natural history. Oops, the wrong button, sorry. So this is why I say globalization doesn't always help. That cartoon says, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. So that's the joke. So basically, when people get used to working virtually, for example, it doesn't matter where you are in place or time. Also, a lot of the time that's spent online virtually means that there's less time outside or in the physical world interacting. And this is, I don't know if any of you have heard about something called a nature deficit. But there's this idea of kids especially not really being outside very much and knowing where they live. And of course, if you always have computerized maps and recommendations of where to go, there's a little bit less of the wandering and coincidence that happens that allows you to explore your world. And of course, there's the homogenization of culture. As you see, that's sort of a strip mall that could be anywhere. So commercialization and globalization has made things very alike. And then information bubbles, which is extremely important because the more you get your information from sources online, the more you're able to filter that information to only include information that you agree with. And this happens even without your own knowledge, as Google and Facebook filter for you the things that they think you're interested in. So if they know that you like soccer, they start sending you lots of information about soccer. But that means you're not going to accidentally come across any information about American football, or you're less likely to. So I think that a sense of local belonging is a prerequisite to global awareness. And a lot of our curriculum development and teacher training is really focused on place-based education, where you foster hands-on connection to local place. And this becomes a strong foundation for global awareness and citizenship, especially in New York, where people do come from more than one country, where they actually get to finally understand how where they are now is different from where their parents came from, and also allows them to create connections and understandings through empathy. So we're trying to give teachers and schools educational strategies and tools to promote a sense of place. Ecology is our game. Basically, as I said, I come from an ecology and conservation biology background. So some of this was post hoc, right? We had our own agenda. We want to teach conservation science. But a lot of our funders had other ideas. And so, and our teachers had requirements to teach what they had to teach. So, but what we found is that we could use environmental science and ecology as a really good, strong lens for many different educational purposes. So in terms of examining place of belonging, of course, ecology is the study of place. It's the study of why things are where they are and how they react with each other and interact with the environment. So it is specifically about home. It's also really excellent because ecology is all about diversity and local uniqueness and understanding how those different attributes come to be. But it uses overarching principles to explain those ideas. And so, for example, evolutionary pressures for adaptation is just an overarching process that you can apply to any particular context or ecosystem. And so the other thing that is really important about ecology is that it invites students to think about their own place. What is their place? What's their role where they live? Why do they live where they live? And what does it mean that they live where they live? So they are the product of their place in time, their place in time and location, and their systemic role. They are sort of determined by all the conditions around them and how they interact with those. So they belong. This is the place where they belong. And it also promotes systems thinking. So as they start to think about, what is their community, what is their neighborhood, you have to define, where do I come from? Do you come from New York, or do you come from the Bronx? If you come from the Bronx, do you come from the South Bronx, or do you come from the wealthy part of the Bronx to the west? And all of these have cultural meanings. But there's also geographic meanings. There's reasons why the wealthy people live in one place and the less wealthy people live in the other place. So thinking about how you define boundaries, we help students start thinking about it in a scientific way and in a physical, ecological way, so that they look a little, they are aware of very social things like income and wealth, but to understand why there are attributes of topography, for example, that are the reason why the wealthy people live somewhere. So our integrated ecology curriculum really focuses on having teachers focus on the local environment. We We did it for 5 years, and we used environmental science as the framework. And we provided teacher training and curriculum development to implement these project-based learning. I think the two primary words that described our program is that it'd be locally based and that it'd be project-based. And just as Bruce was saying before, the contextual integration and giving students problems to think about and learn from is what really makes them work through the reasoning. Okay, so one of the main things is that they cumulatively contribute to an outcome or deliverable. Just as he was saying, it's not just a discrete do this, then do this the next day, then do that the next day. Students need to see that everything that they're learning contributes to an end goal. So we tried to develop projects where we explicitly showed that to them and where they explicitly got better at tasks that were repeated and repeated and repeated in different ways, from observational techniques to collecting data and tallying information and to representing and understanding that information. So, and every time they got through an iteration, we would say, this is what you did last time, only you're doing it this way. And now you're doing it this way, and you're getting better. And now you have better information and a better understanding of the pattern. The two models that we've worked with, one was called Integrated Project Week. And this was because so many schools don't have time to do projects. So we worked with a school that was actually fairly large with 1,000 students. And they just decided, we're going to do this for a week. We'll suspend classes, and then the entire school will be involved in projects in groups of 30 students. So that's one model that is sort of, it takes a lot of planning, but is actually easier to implement for some schools because of issues of time and curriculum. The other one that we've done in 5 other schools was to carry out grade-wide projects where we work with all the teachers in a single grade from all subjects. Even though there was an ecology focus, we included all the social sciences as well. And we came up with projects that would be worked on sometimes once a week. It's sometimes explicitly integrated with the curriculum that they already were teaching. Or sometimes they would want it a little bit more compact, maybe like a 2-week or a 3-week project that would be integrated into the other curriculum. So some of the projects, you're not going to be able to read this, but just to give you an example of the sorts of things that we've done as projects. We did a beach ecosystem survey where the students actually went out and measured the biodiversity. And they also looked at adaptations between the tidal zones, the beach zone and the pelagic zone. And then they also did a social science survey of the garbage on the beach. So all the activities that led up to this final day at the beach where they did the survey was followed up by analysis and reporting. Enabled them to do basically an authentic scientific research and to understand the implications of what they found. Live from New York, and this is where some of the projects are a little more creative. Sometimes they'll want to create a movie, so this is where they decided to create film of the species in New York. Math and art was from a math teacher who wanted to create a visualization of mathematics, so that was a different way to look. And so all the skills that they learned led to them being able to understand the visualization concepts. And the Mean Green Growing Machine is sort of a community project where they actually got to re-landscape a park in New York City. So they replanted the whole thing. And that meant designing it, figuring out the requirements for the plants, etc. And doing the work, of course. The grade-wide project examples were anything, and some of these were similar actually. Like the redesign of the school courtyard was actually something that was very exciting for the students because they actually got to create proposals, send them to the community board, and have the winning proposal accepted to actually have their schoolyard redesigned. So what we provided them were regular services and training. We would go to the schools, we would meet with the teachers. We had a curriculum specialist who was very experienced both in the classroom and in the field, and that teacher was there as a resource. Not only that, but we also helped them develop the collegial sort of relationships and collaborations among their own teachers so that they could meet on their own time. And the fact that they were doing projects together collaboratively with teachers helped understand what the connections were between the subjects and help the teachers be more supportive of each other. But the main really strong, important thing I think was the modeling and the co-teaching. Having someone there that was in the schools that could help the teachers with precisely the skills that Bruce was talking about. You don't always know how to identify what the students are missing or are not getting from the instruction and how to lead them through a reasoning process. And so these are what I call the essential aspects of IEC. And the ones that are in bold are the ones that I thought were most relevant to global citizenship. So my basic thesis basically is that if you give them these experiences and these understandings to really ground them in their local sense of place and their understanding, then that's what they need in order to apply. So you can't really compare an apple to an orange if you don't know what an apple is first. So they're getting to know who they are first and what makes them where they are before they can actually extend and apply that outward. And this is a nice quote about place-based learning, and the second one especially teaches a sense of community and gives students a model for living well anywhere. So the place-based learning gives them motivation. It gives them access to really see and physically touch and visit the places that they're studying. And it also gives them a new perspective on what they think they already know. They're seeing their sort of regular world life in a new way. This is something that many teachers use, but it's especially important when you're doing a project where you need to use overarching questions that tie together the disparate skills and information that you're teaching them. So one of our projects was how does change happen? And we used the cleanup of the Hudson River as an example. And then there's a singer, Pete Seeger, who started a whole grassroots movement through his music. And then, whoops, something happened. And then he went to the hotel. Okay, thank you. Basically, they're just understanding all the different ways that change happens from a personal level, a physical level, how did the river actually get cleaner, how the government became involved later, and all the sorts of evolution of change. So using the idea of change allows them to really tie together all these different subject areas and get the students to always be coming back to a specific idea to organize their information. We also focus on things that are real and local. Oops. So we don't want them to, even though it's important, necessarily studying, say, the destruction of the rainforest, because we want it to be something that actually impacts them in their own lives first. And that's, again, the people studying the transect. And we want to show them, we want these projects to be real, that they're actually doing scientific and other, they're using these skills and these methods and techniques that are actually used in the real world. We don't really want models. We don't want to tell them this is how scientists do things. We want them to actually do it themselves and to do it out in the real world where the outcomes might not be known. It's not like a lab where the teacher knows what the outcome's going to be and she'll tell you whether you did the lab right or not. And one of the main things that we want to instill in the students is their ability to do these things. You don't have to be a genius or a science major to measure. They're there on the beach measuring, doing a biodiversity survey inside their transects. And this is something that's really, all these students are middle school students, so it's very accessible to many different ages. And of course we want to get the kids out of the classroom. So the idea, of course, of getting them outside, but also that there's places in their community that they may not know about that are resources, that teachers may not know about that are resources, to help get beyond the sort of logistical boundaries that are perceived in taking the students somewhere to physically experience what they're learning in the classroom. Sometimes museums and cultural institutions are expensive and difficult to get to, but sometimes you can just take the students literally outside the school building. The neighborhood transect happened right outside of the school building and went for 5 blocks in one direction and 5 blocks in the other direction. And it still provided plenty of data for the students to decide and pick issues that they wanted to investigate further. And then there's, of course, the systemic view. They get to learn about the movement of goods, services, people, and the physical flows in and out of their environment. And that also leads to an understanding of of interrelatedness within their systems. So this is just one example. We took students to a forest north of New York City, and this is the first time for many students ever being in an intact forest. So it's a great resource for many reasons, but it's not just being enforced for the immersion, but being able to look, as I said, at actual natural objects. And having a staff and experts there to help you when you are not the expert. We did many different explorations. We looked at biological indicators. We took some hikes, and we looked at evidence of herbivores, carnivores, and decomposers, mapping their forest, and so on. And then we tied that in with literacy. They read a novel that was based on somebody surviving in the woods, and we had them do different sorts of literacy exercises that were very easily integrated. And we did art, math, and social studies as well. One of our successful ones was naturalist notebooks, where they learned the difference between scientific representation and artistic representation of the things that they were seeing. And then, of course, the math and social studies I discussed a little bit earlier. So our idea is that if you provide these experiences, you'll imprint the students in a way, and that this will have, they'll retain information better, and they'll have deeper understandings and provide the basis for the transfer of knowledge. So I'm going to kind of go through some of this. We all know lots of different ways to represent globalization. Now, one last thing before I go, actually. They asked me to speak a little bit on education for all, and my understanding of that is that it's usually an economic issue about access to education, especially in the countries where there isn't universal education. But there is universal education in the United States. It's free for K through 12. And so our problem is that students don't always graduate. We have relatively high dropout rates. So this is a cartoon about bringing a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So students all get led to the water in New York, but they don't all complete it. And I said it's not an economic problem because there's not an issue with them having access, but it's a socioeconomic problem because for whatever reason, the combination of social factors keeps them from graduating. So when we developed our program, actually, we got funding from the Robin Hood Foundation, and they actually weren't interested in science or education as its own goal. They were interested in poverty alleviation. And their idea was if you got people to graduate from high school, then they would be employed, they would have a degree, and then they would not be on welfare and they would not be poor. And so there is a link that they see between student engagement and high school graduation, especially at the middle school level. And engagement you can affect engagement where you can't affect socioeconomic background, for example. All of these many different factors that can affect students' learning are really difficult and complex, whereas one thing that teachers can address is student engagement. And that's why it's very comment targeted. Okay, so that just reiterates that. So students who are more engaged in middle school are more engaged, are less likely to drop out of high school. And this is something that's validated across the literature. And this is because, engagement mediates the effects and mediates some effects and moderates other effects. Just as I said, basically, there's many, many complicated factors, but engagement is something that can address all of them. And so we tried to figure out how to measure engagement, and engagement is complex. There's cognitive engagement, psychological and emotional engagement, behavioral engagement. Very difficult to measure engagement. But it was fairly easy to measure the outcomes of engagement, and there's actually been several longitudinal studies in the United States, in Boston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, over 10 years, that found 3 very specific indicators that predict dropout. The failing grades in core subjects, including literacy and math, having behavioral problems, and also attendance lower than 80%. So those are 3 things that you can really measure, and we measured them in these schools where we did IEC, and we found a pretty strong decrease in risk indicators. So we were able to show Robin Hood that these risk indicators had declined and that there was a lower risk of dropout. And the test scores were less clear, but basically, this is the take-home. Because there's so many complex factors, you'd like to have one thing that you can address that can mediate all of them, and that is engagement. And there are ways to measure the outcomes of engagement. And we hope that project-based learning and approaches like IEC improve engagement. And so far, it seems like this.
in order for students to learn globally. Our last presenter for this session will be Professor Rosnani Hashim from Islamic International University of Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken.
Mr. Chairperson, moderators, fellow panel, and fellow participants. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Well, I'm going to talk something that is closely related to what Bruce has been doing, except that I think Bruce did not explain any explanation about the change that's going on. It's going to make teaching more exciting and meaningful. Also, it's quite related to a way of conflict resolution, a pedagogy that is related to conflict resolution, that is quite in line with what Rebecca is talking about, the global citizen. Okay? My paper is going to be, there are 3 parts. The first part is trying to explain the change in the state of the world today that requires a change in the teaching and learning strategies. The second part is talking about what are the new teaching strategies that ought to be encouraged. And the final part is an example of one such strategy, which I call pedagogy of philosophical inquiry, or using the term which I use in Malaysia, I call it the hikmah pedagogy. Okay? I think, as you all know, there is a lot of changes in the world, especially with the coming of the invention of the ICT, and we have what we call the new generation, the next generation, who are very familiar with all the digital devices, like iPads and so on. Okay, and I don't think they can survive today. The young generation, they can't survive without this gadget, the internet and so on. Okay, so how does this affect education of teachers? And we know before that teachers were known to be the sage on the stage. So are they still the sage, where they look up upon, they are the real authority, you don't question them? Is it true today for this generation after the globalization and the ICT? I'm going to skip all those. I'm going to skip all the effects of globalization, education, which is a lot today. A lot of shift, for example, some of the shift due to globalization. I think you are familiar with this. We are no more the sage on the stage actually. We are just the guide on the side. With this globalization, we are just the guide on the side. Especially when teaching things that use technology. Now let's see the effect of ICT on teaching and learning strategies. In fact, if you used to teach, in the past we used to teach something that's linear, we follow the textbook, we use one chapter after the next and so on. There's order and sequence. But today it's hypermedia learning. They can go to one section, one topic, and then that topic they can branch to other topics. It's no more linear. In other words, if you browse to the internet, you're looking for A, but along the way you met B, so you are more interested in B. So you are looking for B. So you are easily deterred from your original objective. Okay? And in terms of instruction, formerly teacher just instruct, give explanation, like what our moderator was saying just now, it's just giving instruction. But now we want the student to construct the knowledge themselves. So it's more constructional learning rather than instructional learning. And because of that, it's not teacher-centered anymore. In other words, you are the main focus, you are the authority, you are the one who gives. But now, the learner has to develop it by himself. The learner with the access to information that's available today, you don't expect it to be an empty vessel anymore. You just give them like sponge, you pour water in sponge and they absorb. But today, it's not that way anymore. You have to teach them how to learn, how to find information in the internet. So in other words, it's a different kind of strategy. And schooling is it's differentiated. Before we said that we differentiate between getting a job and going to school. You finish your university education, then you go for a job. But today, learning takes place all along, even you start working. So in other words, once you start schooling, it is one of the steps towards lifelong learning. That's the change today. Okay? And then if before one size fits all, now we can, with the presence of the ICT technologies, we can customize learning to the needs of the special groups. So I'm not so sure whether you agree with me. Learning as torture, then move from that to learning as fun. I think if we teach the way we first demonstrated just now, then you find that learning is fun. Okay? And then teacher as facilitator to teacher as facilitator. So not just transmit, but you facilitate the students' learning. So these are some of the effects of ICT on teaching and learning strategies. So this is the first part I was talking about. Okay? So what will this shift mean? If there is this shift, how does it affect our teaching? Okay? First of all, you realize that because of the easy access to information through the internet, even just now there's a picture of a baby even playing with the computer, or even your 2-year-old or 3-year-old child playing with the iPad or tablet, right? They know, they don't need instruction, they can find for themselves games. I have my own grandchild find their own games at the age of 2 years old with the iPad, with the tablet. So you can imagine what it's like for them, okay? So now the content is less important. They're learning how to learn. This is the issue now. It's not the content so much as learning how to learn. Or the process of acquiring knowledge is more important than the content of knowledge itself. So it's learner-centered rather than subject or teacher-centered. I guess there is exception to this. We are talking about the review religion, the review text. Okay, you still need the content is there. At a point of time, it's still subject-centered. But I think as you go higher, it should be learner-centered. Okay, because the learner can think for themselves already. Again, it's a quotation from the book mentioned by Rebecca just now, this fragment. The world is getting more flat. Yeah, it means that with the invention of the internet, with ICT, everyone has quote-unquote equal opportunity to getting at knowledge. With that equal opportunity to getting at knowledge, that means the competition now, it's open for all. Everyone has equal opportunity, so it's flat now. That's what I mean by the world, learning in the flat world. But I'm not so sure about that. Before they used to say that everything is free in the internet. You can have access to the internet for free. But now you can see that it's free in the beginning, but then they start to charge you. Nothing is free in the internet actually. So I'm not so sure that you can say there's equal opportunity. But in the beginning, they say that everyone has equal opportunity. That's why he refers to the flat world, okay? But he mentioned that in the future, how we educate our children will be more important than how much we educate them. And in the flat world, the most important ability to develop is the ability to learn how to learn. And to develop the curiosity and passion quotient, which are even more important than intellectual quotient. So here I would like to also reiterate the importance of curiosity. Okay? There's another quotation here, work matters, but curiosity matters more. Nobody works harder at learning than a curious kid. So in other words, and we've been able in our teaching and also students learning to arouse the students' curiosity. Because if the students are curious, then they will have to know the answer. If they're not curious, then there's no engagement in learning. So this is the issue now, whether we're able to raise our students' curiosity, whether they are in primary school, secondary school, or even in the university. So this is the issue. The most important thing is to learn how to learn, okay, and to be curious. And this is where I use questions to measure students' curiosity. If students don't have questions, that means they are not curious. How do we know that a person is curious? Because they ask a lot of questions. And if you don't ask questions, then you know they're not curious. And normally young children have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, in the primary school setting that they go, okay, these schools stifle the questions. So they become not wondering anymore. That's the problem of our system, not the children, okay? Hopefully with the new learning strategy, we will still foster their questioning and curiosity. I think this is again a quotation. And even UNESCO talk about the 4 modes of learning: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be together, learning to be. Okay? Having said that, okay, having been able to access information, does it mean that we are going to get brilliant students? Actually, there are some comments made by educationalists and also scholars here that say that it doesn't mean that if you have information, it can become knowledge and meaningful to them. Okay? Whether they will get the wisdom or not. Unless it is taught in a meaningful way. Otherwise, they become just like other characters where they know what they learn and much meaning to themselves. For example, one Malaysian scholar, Alatas, Psychotip Alatas, he talked about ilm. Ilm only means the arrival of the meaning of an object of knowledge, the soul. Or the arrival of the soul at the meaning of an object of knowledge. If you have information but it doesn't provide any meaning to you, it's not ilm yet. It's not knowledge. It's just information. And Brunner, the American psychologist, said learning is an effort to obtain meaning, understanding about the world and themselves, which encompasses various cognitive perspectives. So again, the importance of meaning in information that is assessed. Sternberg, I think once was a Yale psychologist, we have focused too much on intelligence, but not wisdom. Wisdom is very different from intelligence. And then T.S. Eliot, poet, asked, as we dive deeper into IC today, whither is the life lost in living? Whither is, or where is the wisdom lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge lost in information? So it's a bit skeptical there also. Okay? So, these changes I mentioned earlier. So, today, when we talk with employers, we talk with educators, okay, we realize that these are 5 basic skills to be fostered. Communication skills, and we are living in the world today, international language is English. And even Indonesia is going in that direction, I noticed that. And then you have critical and critique thinking skill, interpersonal skill, collaborative skill, or cooperative learning, you mentioned that, and lifelong learning. The question is, how do we foster these skills? Now, one of the ways to foster this skill, teacher has to change and students have to change. How do teachers change? Teachers have to become learners themselves, not just teachers. Because teachers, in the past maybe you can be a specialist in a subject and that's enough for you. But today, not only a specialist in the subject, but you also must know how to deliver the subject. And there are so many more modes of delivery compared to the past. And the mode of delivery that students of the next generation are looking for is the use of technology. If teachers don't know how to use technology, and using just the mode of talk and chalk still, right? Then it will be boring to the students who are so used to watching the screen that change very quickly. And very dynamic actions, right? So this is teachers have to also become learners of how to deliver. Okay? In other words, the learning curve has grown steeper. We must learn not only what to teach, but also how to teach. Okay? And I think that's the main thing. And then you have to change your teacher's role. If before we said formal learning is important, but today it's becoming relevant. There are many ways of informal learning that is student-centered, like going to like the ecology, field research, field trips. So there are many more different ways of learning. So teachers' role has to change from the stage on the stage to the stage at the side. Okay. So to give students this type of skill, we must engage and empower them as we educate them for insight. So that is how the teachers should change. Now how should the students change? The students also have to change, okay? I mentioned here, the students also have to be regarded as not normal empty vessel. Students can, with the access to information, students can also be treated as someone who can teach teachers. There are many situations today we notice that, especially in the use of IT, our students are better than us. When we have trouble with our laptop, just ask the boys or the girls. They can do it better than us. And when we find information, they can do it better than us because they have all the time in the world and we don't have the time in the world. So we don't have all the time in the world. So in other words, don't treat students as just mere students. They can be teachers. And that's why today when we want learner-centered, students to be active, sometimes students do their own research and their own presentation. In other words, they are teaching us and also their colleagues, their peers. So this is how we guide the students to teach. And we can learn from them, not just them learning from us. And to have this kind of teaching and learning situation, the dialogue education is where there are two-way open dialogue, okay, will be an interesting part of learning activities. There has to be conversation, not just explanation by the teachers. Because class discussion in which students actively participate and encouraged to raise questions and pose problems themselves may really increase critical thinking skills. Okay? So this is here the thing that we mentioned here. Students as learners, as teachers, okay? The learners as teachers, they can do many things. For example, using project-based learning, classroom discussions, cooperative learning groups, teaching learning group, and cognitive inquiry. So this is the shift that has to occur. Like Jack mentioned, Bruce mentioned, not working in a group, working as a group. I would say that to me, I use the cognitive inquiry term, okay? So I'd like to move to the next one, which is the pedagogy, which I felt is very useful to nurture all these skills that you mentioned just now, which I've used from my own experience with my own students, also students in the school, okay? Where they are seated differently, not seated in this manner, but seated in a seminar type manner, where everyone can participate. As you can see in the picture there, they sit around the table, but they can sit around the class, okay, face to face. Another, the discussion, the philosophy is that the discussion is between not just the teacher and the student, or me and you like as it is right now, but if they sit there, it's between students and students itself. So I think I will not talk more, except this raise critical question reflection. I'll show you video tapes, a video clip of this, okay? But before that, the pedagogy is useful to find meaning. It involves concepts, and every